Before we get to today's stories, I would like to say a disclaimer. The stories presented in this video delve into themes that might be unsettling for some viewers, including graphic descriptions and eerie scenarios. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. These tales aren't for the faint of heart. If my chilling content sends shivers down your spine and leaves you craving more, please subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me. Park ranger just told me his scariest story. It was one of those late nights on the job. But that didn't bother me at all. In fact, it was one of my favorite parts of being a park ranger. Hanging around late at night with just a few of my fellow rangers in the middle of the woods, it was just like huddling around a campfire while you told stories. Except we were indoors around a fireplace. It was the middle of spring, but it had been cold lately, so while the afternoons were pleasant, the nights had been chilly, which was why we were all inside, gathered around a fire while on the clock. The ranger station was beyond comfortable with a fire, so I was contentedly sitting in one of the many leather couches facing it. We were all midway through a shift, and like many nights on the job, it was quiet, so we got to talking about nothing in particular. There's nothing like the natural flow of an unplanned conversation. Outside, the evening had slowly given way to night, and the darkness had settled upon the woods with its usual silent thoroughness. The area may be a park during the day, but at night, it was the woods. Parks inherently sound fun and brings to mind cookouts, whereas the woods has an inherently spooky vibe. There were 4 of us sitting by the fire in the ranger station on that chilly night. Me, Harland, Anthony, and Craig. Craig had just finished talking about his cousin's wedding when Anthony asked Harland what his scariest story was from working here all these years. Usually, Harland just chuckled and said he'd heard some crazy things over the years. But not this time. This time, he sat there quietly for a moment before he said, "The Witch of Blackthorn Creek." That was when we all went completely still. If we were just like people huddled around a campfire, Harland was the one in charge of building the fire. He was the ranger we always deferred to. He'd been on the job long enough to have earned that right. Harland's family had also been in the area for generations, so if anyone had any stories to tell about what may have happened here, it was him. Plus, he was a terrific guy, hardworking and beyond helpful when you needed something. So when someone like Harland tells you he's heard of a story like that, you listen intently, especially with the tone of voice he used, serious and no nonsense, without a trace of amusement. "The Witch of Blackthorn Creek," Harland began in a clear voice as we all gave him our full attention. "The story was first told to me by my Uncle George, who had been a lumberjack for years. According to him, people said there was a curse on the land, which was placed there by a witch. It all started one year, when the harvest went bad. Since there had been nothing but plentiful harvests every year, it made people beyond suspicious. There was barely enough grain and stuff to get through winter. It didn't help matters that the town had generally been prosperous but had recently started to go through some financial difficulties. Then, numerous bits of misfortune happened within the community over the years. Houses burning down, people going missing and never being found again. Periodically, there would be something odd left lying around near where someone had vanished. Creepy things like weird-looking dolls made from wood that never failed to rattle people. There wasn't anyone around who people thought was capable of anything like this. And since one of the families in town had experienced something like this before in a different town many years ago, they suspected there was some kind of curse put on them. Especially after a few people who kept track of all the strange events realized all of them took place on a full moon. Harland took a sip of his coffee before he continued. It all came to a head when there was a terrible accident at the town lumber mill. A fire that no one could figure out how it started. Several employees died and many others were badly injured, and the lumber mill, which was one of the biggest employers around, closed. That was when the paranoia that had been lingering under the surface boiled over. So when some people from town found an abandoned cottage in the woods near Blackthorn Creek, with weird symbols written on the walls and the floor, they grabbed their torches, set the place on fire, and watched it burn. According to the crowd, the cabin took forever to burn, much longer than the people thought possible. But once it did finally burn down, they took the ashes and buried them deep in the woods and didn't mark the location, hoping that would be the end of it. And, for a while, that seemed to be the case. But every once in a while, something would happen that would make people in town look over their shoulders. Nothing major. A bit of bad luck in the form of an injury, or some suspicious noises outside the house after dark, and perhaps some scratch marks on the door or the wall. But ever since then, people would be very careful what they did, especially if there was a full moon. Then he paused for a moment to look at the fire, which was crackling pleasantly in the fireplace. I couldn't tell you how old I was when I first heard the story, but I remember exactly how I felt. Confused. Because the story, although creepy and entertaining, didn't quite make sense to me. And I said something to Uncle George about that, and he laughed. Then he said he agreed that the story was long on atmosphere and short on believability. That's when he got serious. Told me that although the story was a bit of fiction, he never doubted that it came from somewhere, and there was indeed something going on out in the woods. Then he added that it didn't matter how old I was, where I was, who I was with, or what was going on. If I got a terrible feeling, I should listen to it. And I've listened to every feeling I've gotten since then. It's never served me wrong. He looked around at us, slowly taking us all in. I've never quite believed that story, but I will be the last person to deny that. In all the years I've been out here, I've felt things on occasion. Things that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. And on even fewer occasions, I've seen things. Fleeting glances at things that I wasn't sure I saw. But there was one time when I not only felt something, I heard something. The air in the ranger station was completely still. I briefly glanced at my colleagues as Harlan said this, and they met my glance, and I could see they were just as gripped by the story as I was. It was about 30 years ago, Harlan explained. I was just starting out as a park ranger. This was back in the early 90s, when technology and life in general was very different from today. I'd grown up out in nature, and I'd seen plenty of scary movies, and more importantly, I'd grown up hearing countless spooky stories about what may or may not have been lurking outside, so I wasn't exactly sheltered. But there are some things you're never truly prepared to experience. The fire in the fireplace popped in the grate, but we were so absorbed in Harlan's story, we barely noticed. There was plenty of wood in the fire, so we didn't have to worry about that for a while. It was early November. Halloween had just ended, which made everyone sad because I remember that year was a particularly fun one. Darkness seemed to be arriving earlier and earlier, so I was barely halfway through my shift when the sun was going down. I remember it had been raining almost every day, so the days were all gray and cloudy, and the nights were damp with plenty of fog. But that particular morning was dry. All the leaves that had clung to the trees had been scattered by the winds and rain, so they lay there on the grass, all damp and torn. My job on that particular day was to go around raking them up so they didn't completely cover the trails and paths that people walked on. The chill in the air was that chill only late fall can bring. The dampness that seems to soak into your skin and never let go. I had just finished one section of the park and was walking back to my truck when the rain started up again, and it did so with a fury. So I hustled it to the truck, got inside, and headed back to the ranger station where I planned to spend the rest of the evening. And since it was a quiet night at the ranger station, it looked like I would get what I wanted. I was used to working the late shift by myself as the night supervisor, so being alone didn't bother me. I'd always been a quiet type who liked to read a book, so it was an ideal situation for me, except for that night. Harlan took a deep breath before he continued. Because Halloween was over and the rain had been steady, the park hadn't received as many visitors as it usually had. But I was inside the ranger station, this ranger station in fact, which was just as cozy and warm as you see it now. Plus, now that I was done with my task, I was free to read a book, so I wasted no time in curling up by the fire with a paperback. I'd spent many a shift this way, and it was fine by me. I'd happily read a book on a nice day, but on a rainy day? Nothing better. Eventually, I started to get hungry. Since I'd just brought a light snack but turned out to be craving something bigger, I decided to order pizza. There was a local joint that was only a few minutes away that often delivered out here back then, so I didn't hesitate to give them a call. I ordered a medium pizza with pepperoni, and as I hung up, the rain started to really pound heavily on the station roof. I knew from experience that the rain pounding on the station roof could truly be loud. It seemed to surround you from all sides. But by the time the headlights pulled into the driveway, the rain had faded to a slight drizzle. But I could see the grass leading up here was pretty well soaked, and there were numerous small puddles on both the grass and the road. The trees were swaying along with the winds, and the sky was getting darker by the minute as night was settling in. By now, the outdoor lights had started to switch on as the car from the pizza place pulled up in front of the station, its windshield wipers going back and forth as it stopped in front of the entrance. I stood in front of it, under the part of the roof that kept me out of the rain. The driver, a young guy named Derek in his early 20s, got out of the driver's seat and grabbed the pizza from the passenger's side. Derek had delivered here before, and he'd always done a great job. We chit-chatted as I handed him the cash with a generous tip. Then Derek handed me the pizza and was just about to go back to his car before he stopped and stared at something behind me. He paused and said that it would probably sound crazy, but it looked like there was a woman lurking in the woods near the ranger station. We all sat there silently for a moment before Harlan continued. I remember just standing there when he told me. The words sounded almost foreign as Derek said them out loud. My first reaction was that it was impossible, but there was only one way to find out, so I turned behind me to look at where he was pointing. He took another sip of coffee. The cluster of trees he was pointing at was a dense area of tall pine trees. They've been long gone by now, but back then there wasn't much in the way of illumination out there. But even I could see there was nothing there. I stood there, the pizza still clutched in my hand, as I waited for anything to happen, but nothing emerged from the woods. I was just about to turn back to Derek when I heard "Get out" from beside me in a hushed voice, clear as could be. I turned around immediately to look at Derek, and without saying a word, I knew he'd heard it too. But while it was creepy as could be, I didn't know for sure what it meant. It didn't come out as an ominous command, more like a warning. But I won't lie, standing there outside, I'd never felt fear like that before. I'd been afraid before, and I'd been afraid after, but not like that. That fear was less like a feeling and more like a part of your body, like it's always there, and only rarely are you truly aware of it. Sitting there watching Harlan, it was clear that although we were sitting there in the present, he had been immediately transported back to that cold November night. I couldn't have told you how much time passed. May have only been a minute or two, but despite the dwindling light, I thought I could see shapes moving far out in the woods. Very far out. After a moment, you couldn't see anything at all. Then Harlan's voice became quieter. To this day, I have no idea why that sight filled me with so much fear. Just like I also have no idea how I knew it was people. But I did. And I knew it was people, as in more than one. Much more than one. But I had no idea exactly how many. Then, almost as if on cue, I heard the word, "now." And it was all the motivation I needed to tell Derek we had to go. He didn't need to be told twice, because we hopped in his car and got out of there as fast as we could. Didn't stop for about 20 miles, and we were far away from the ranger station. By that point, the fear had slowly faded and I was starving, so we split the pizza while debating what to tell my superiors. I eventually decided to say that I was feeling really sick and went to see a doctor I knew. Harlan chuckled. But it didn't take long for me to realize my excuse for leaving would be completely forgotten. Because after I left, the ranger station had been broken into by a group of people. The security camera we had at the time saw all 6 of them, dressed from head to toe in black, break right through the front door. Just crashed right through it. Then, minutes later, they came back out without taking anything and vanished into the trees. The cops thoroughly searched the area, but found nothing. I found out when I called my superiors to tell them I had to leave because I was feeling horrible. From the time on the camera, they appeared to arrive within mere minutes after I left with Derek. We all exchanged a look as the fact that he really was talking about this ranger station dawned on us. Sitting across from us, Harlan didn't say anything, but I knew he could tell the three of us were seeing the ranger station like never before. The conclusion the cops reached, Harlan eventually said, is that it was a gang of professional criminals who saw the ranger station and decided to see what they could find. Since there was apparently nothing they could make use of, they split. And every year on that day since that happened, I've taken a single flower and left it by where Derek says he saw someone that night. I've never seen or heard that voice since that night, but on occasion I felt the presence of something or someone watching me, and not in an unpleasant way. But that's the thing about the woods. There's no telling what you may find in them. And if you're really paying attention, it's amazing what you can learn. Like I learned that November night, all those years ago, was a full moon. The clouds just happened to obscure it out here. I was a national park ranger. Here are some of the things I encountered. Hi there. I'm Samantha, Sam, and I was park ranger for 6 years. I won't specify where, as I don't want to get in trouble. One of the people I worked with told me to read the other park ranger stories on here, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And shit, is it good to see someone being honest. It inspired me to share some of my own stories. People need to know what happens in the woods. I quit my job a couple years ago. I couldn't deal with having to bottle up all the things I've seen. Nobody wants to talk about them, but I feel I'm drowning in the memories of it all. So I'm going to share them. I don't know if I'll be able to share it all. It might be too hard, but I'll give it a go. I hope this raises some awareness of the true danger of the woods and make people consider their safety. I don't want people to think I'm copying someone or making these things up. I'm just sharing my stories and experiences. Let's get into it. This was my first ever weird experience as a junior ranger. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't friendly. I had just received a call about screams coming from deeper in the forest off one of the more popular trails. This really wasn't unusual. If you've heard a mountain lion, you know it sounds like a woman screaming. So just as I was about to set off, my chief at the time asked to come along. I found this a little odd as the job seemed a bit too insignificant for his rank, but I brushed it off as I was new and thought maybe he wanted to check my progress. We set off making small talk, and I was obviously trying to suck up a little. We were joking around. He made a quick remark and said something about making sure that I take even these small jobs seriously, because you'll never know what you'll find. And that was some of the most valuable advice I've gotten from someone on this job, because I learned my lesson from not listening to it. But that's a different story. We get to the area where the call was, and begin north of the trail where the noise had been heard. We hear the screams, and it sounds like a mountain lion, but something sounds really off about it. But we keep walking towards it. We're about 10 minutes into walking towards the sound, when all of a sudden, it's like all the sound had been sucked from the woods. It was dead silent. I couldn't even hear my breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I look at my chief, and he had the same nervous expression on his face as I did. But by the way he was reacting, it felt as if he had dealt with something similar before, which I now know to be true. Just as quick as the silence came, I started to hear this low buzzing, but it wasn't just buzzing. I could feel the vibration of it in the whole body so much so that my ears and jaws started to hurt. I can only describe it as if when you are getting your teeth drilled in at the dentist, but it felt even worse. Even my vision started to vibrate, and as that happened, I swear I saw this black figure about 7 feet tall step out from a few trees in front of me and started with that same scream as it bent down and began to crawl towards us. As anyone would, I freak the fuck out and step back to start running. My chief grabs my arm very hard, just as I start to sprint, almost knocking me over. He puts his other arm around me and holds my arms very tight as he begins to walk me out of the forest. Just as I'm about to put up a fight and tell him to fucking run, he says in a very calm voice, "Don't run, don't talk, don't look back, just keep walking." And I did exactly what he said. He knew something I didn't, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to test the theory of death. That 10-minute walk was excruciating because I knew it was crawling behind us by the buzzing in the back of my head and the sound of a Versthink, its light wailing. I wanted to run so bad. Eventually, I think it ran off because all the noise in the forest came back and the buzzing stopped. We get back on the trail and I'm shaking. I was in so much shock I couldn't even cry. He lets go of me and begins walking back to main base without acknowledging what happened. I start going crazy and screaming at him, asking what the hell that was, and he says, and yes, I remember word for word what he said. There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us that we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle that, you should pack your bags now. He kept walking, and I walked a bit behind, trying to shake that horrible feeling and tried to find a reasonable answer for what just happened. I clearly stayed in the job. When it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people and I love nature, but in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. I wish I had left when he told me to pack my bags, in all honesty. I know this experience doesn't sound all that scary, but trust me, there are worse ones. Living through it was definitely much scarier than reading it in words. Clearly, this first encounter wasn't enough to scare me off, but the ones to come led to my departure of this job. Some experiences are scarier, but some are more explainable. I'm still debating whether to share the rest of my stories. Maybe I'll see how I feel after posting this. I'd love to hear other people's experiences with the woods. A lot of people seem to be interested in the stairs found in the woods. Let me just start by saying that I have seen of stairs in the woods once, and personally it wasn't all too scary, just a bit creepy. I know a couple of my friends back in the force, a force to be reckoned with, have some stories about stairs, ones that they've mentioned in minor detail. But I want to share my experience first, and when and if I decide to contact them and get their permission, maybe I'll post about it. I do, however, have a story about a ladder that I wish I could forget, as just thinking about it gives me the creeps. My experience with stairs is pretty tame, so I'll add another incident after it. We were doing a search for a young girl who had wandered off. We found her. She's fine. The team was stretched out pretty far, so I was walking by myself, but was in shouting distance of people. As I was walking, I found a set of stairs. These stairs sort of looked like they belonged here, but also didn't. They seemed overgrown and like they would have been the steps up to someone's house. But then I realized that there is no way someone could have put these here, and that I had come across a set of the stairs that my other coworkers had touched upon. I thought I'd feel more terrified if I ever came across a pair, but I really didn't. I had this urge to walk up them though, like something was pulling my body towards them. Maybe it was excitement of coming across the phenomenon or some dark shit at work, I don't know. Someone near me called that they had found something, and I was snapped back to reality. I'm really glad someone called out. I'm not sure if I would have walked up them otherwise. We found the girl and all was well, but on the walk back, I told one of my partners that I had seen some stairs. She looked at me concerned and kind of aggressively interrogated me to know if I touched or walked up them. I said no. And that was it. So yeah, pretty tame, nothing too intense. Wish I had more to say about them, but I'm not going to lie or overemphasize anything on here. This next occurrence isn't about stairs, but it is about a ladder, and I'd say they're pretty similar. This was somewhere into my first year as a national park ranger, and around the start of summer, poison ivy tends to get pretty crazy, so we have to do weekly checks on the trails and the bush surrounding them. My partner and I get sent off to check some of the less popular trails. We get to this part on a smaller trail where it forks off for a couple minutes and then joins back at the end, being the idiots we were. We split to then meet back up where it connects again. Keep in mind, we could make each out from the bush that sits in the middle of the path. No biggie, right? He takes the left, and I take the right of the trail. As I'm walking along the path, keeping a cautious eye at the surrounding bush, looking for some ivy, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. I looked to my right to see this large clearing in the middle of the trees. It looked like a man-made circle. It was so perfectly round as if someone had been maintaining it. There wasn't a tree, not a bush, not even a weed. I was so focused on the ground and lack of flora, I almost didn't notice the giant unmissable ladder. I clearly didn't have great observational skills, standing exactly in the middle of the circle. I seriously cannot explain this, but the ladder was standing up right, leaning against nothing. It was like some unknown force was holding it up. I looked all the way up and saw on top stood a man in a business suit. I know this sounds almost funny, but this guy looked like he had just walked straight out of a corporate building. Upon further inspection, I could see that his head was hanging back, looking up towards the sky. His mouth appeared to be gaped open, but I couldn't get a good look. I called up to him a few times, but no response. I walked around the ladder trying to find some strings attached to it in hopes this was some prank or a weird art project, but I couldn't. This guy looked like he was on display for some art exhibition. I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't see my partner through the bushes, so I radioed him to come to my location. But in the meantime, I stupidly decided to touch the ladder. I know you're all probably mad that I went to touch the ladder. I am too. Don't touch weird shit you find in the woods, but I was still new and naive. I get this weird feeling just as I'm about to touch the ladder, but I brush it off as just being spooked, and I touch it. The man at the top snaps his neck in this disturbingly contorted way to look towards me and gives out this ungodly gasp like he was taking his last breath of air. His expression is still gaped, but I've never seen something quite like this. It was like his eyelids and lips had been pulled back to make him seem more surprised. I stepped back, of course, and grabbed my taser from my side. I heard rustling behind me and turned to stick my taser on whatever coming for me, but it was just my partner emerging from the bush who put his hands up quickly in hopes to not be tased. I look back to the circle and the ladder is now flat on the floor and the man is gone. My partner asked what was going on, and I explained what happened and begged him to not think I was crazy. Of course he didn't think that. He knew just as well as I did that this stuff was basically normal and happened all the time. We knew we wouldn't find this guy, but it's still protocol to look anyway, which I didn't enjoy one bit. I was praying we wouldn't find him. Never saw something like this again, and neither has anyone I've ever talked to. I mean, this guy was balancing on the very top of a ladder that wasn't leaning against anything. Who knows, maybe I met Houdini or something. When you see things like this, you have to make some sort of joke about it, or you won't be able to move past it. I'm really glad people are enjoying what I have to say. Again, don't know when I'll write more. Don't expect too much from me. This is kind of tiring, but also pretty cathartic. I'm thinking of also sharing some of the less spooky stories and one that are just humans being mental. Sam. Why I'm no longer a park ranger. Hi everyone. This story comes from one of my friends who used to be ranger at the national park I work at, and not from my personal experience. I've asked him to tell me his scariest experience at the job, and it just so happened to be his last. For immersion's sake, I'll tell it from the first-person view. My normal shifts were during the day, 9 to 5 like most people, but on that day, we were short-handed on the night shift staff, because the last person who worked during those hours had just quit. We had lately had a whole lot of people quitting the night shift, so that meant I had to cover. Weirdly enough, I had never had to work the graveyard shift before then, and I was actually excited for it. I had brought some coffee and 5-hour energy with me because the hours ran 10 to 5, and there was no way I'd make it that far naturally. I got to my tower right before 10 when it was already pitch black, and the cold July night had fully set in. The tower was fairly tall, with several flights of stairs leading up to the top. The whole thing was mostly surrounded by thick forest, except for the trail I came in from, and a murky pond that was just to the right of one of the tower's legs. The pond itself was covered in those little frog pads and had algae floating around over the surface. It was actually quite big for a natural lagoon. I climbed up, and all I could hear was the nonstop sounds of crickets, frogs, and the occasional owl. When I hit the top, I fumbled with my keys until I finally found the right one and walked right on in. The one room was small and square-shaped. 3 of the walls were mostly glass, and the other one was opaque and had the door I just came in. The roof went up like a pyramid for a short length until it peaked, and it was all made of wood. To my left was a nicely made bed and a nightstand with a lamp and a flashlight on top. Not like I'd be using the bed, though. On the wall next to that was my CB radio and communications stand, which every one of those towers had. Next to that sat my refrigerator and microwave, which was part of a small kitchen that extended to the other wall as well. Inside the kitchen on the right wall were several cabinets, some small ones that held snacks and some canned foods, and another set of giant cabinets that I couldn't open, which likely had vacuums and other cleaning supplies that were above my pay grade. Roomy. I went over to the communications stand and did my standard check to make sure everything was properly working. I called into the ranger station's channel and said, "Well, Donnie, it looks like it's just you and me tonight." Donnie didn't say anything back, so I figured he was just taking a shit. I went and grabbed the flashlight on the stand and reached into one of its drawers, pulling out a set of binoculars from it. I went back out onto the balcony and checked to make sure no fire hazards or any other kind of dangerous things were over there. Once I checked that box off my to-do list, I headed back inside and pulled out the chair from the communications stand and put it by one of the glass walls, and grabbed a granola bar from one of the kitchen cabinets to munch on. I put the binoculars up to my eyes and looked over the surrounding forest. It didn't seem like any animals were up and about, and no birds were in the sky either. I skimmed over a couple of clearings to make sure that no teenagers were off camping illegally. Then I went and peeked over at a far ridge where I saw a snowman standing alone in a gap of the trees. Hold the fuck up. It was July. I peeked again to see it wasn't a snowman but some kid in a shitty ghost costume. It looked like the ones from Charlie Brown, with the big black holes for eyes that looked more like they were colored black than actual holes. The kid was still and staring right into my direction, unmoving. I couldn't see the kid's parents anywhere, and by now it was rolling up on 11, so that meant something was up. I broke contact on the kid and walked to the radio, calling into the station. "Donnie, you off the shitter yet?" "Barely made it out, but I'm here," I chuckled. Donnie was always good for a laugh. "There's some kid with a blanket walking around the southeast sector, and they look alone." "A blanket? What the hell are you talking about?" "It's a ghost costume. It's got the black holes for eyes and stuff." "You mean like the Charlie Brown cost? Can you check it out?" "Yeah, I'll go out and see what's up. I'll call in on the walkie-talkie to tell you what I see." "Roger that." I turned off the radio and crossed over to the nightstand drawer to grab the walkie-talkie. Once I had it, I sat back down in the chair and put the binoculars to my eyes, zooming in to where the kid was. The ridge was empty, with no kid in sight, which I knew would make this 1,000 times harder. I pulled up the antenna on the walkie-talkie and dialed to the right channel. "Donnie, you hear me?" "Yep, loud and clear. I'm getting close to the sector. I'm heading up to a ridge for a vantage point." "Perfect. That's where I saw the kid, but they've moved on since then." "Well, I'll just check around to see if I can find anything." I watched as Donnie came over the ridge, waving his flashlight around the dark, until he looked towards the tower and shrugged. "Nothing over here." Damn, hopefully he turns up again. Until then, I'll just notify the police and check with any missing reports. "All right, I'll go back to..." Donnie's voice cut out, and I saw his flashlight turn off in the distance. The small lit-up spot where he stood was swallowed in darkness. "Donnie? You there? Donnie?" I heard no response, and I rushed outside the door and around the corner to where I saw him, yelling his name, only to hear my voice echo into the woods. And that's when it hit me. There wasn't a single other sound in that entire forest. The crickets and frogs had stopped chirping. The wind didn't rustle through the leaves. Everything was completely standstill. I could hear my heartbeat throbbing in my ears and nothing else. I moved my flashlight around the woods for some futile attempt of finding him. I got into that state of mind where I got so scared my throat closed up, and if I moved, I felt like something very bad was going to happen. I had to do something now. I turned around, and as I did, I glanced at the stairs below me. At the bottom stood a skinny, horrifically angled woman. She was tall, dripping with water, with black hair and dark, murky blue skin that stretched across her bent and broken bones. Her gray dress was shredded, and her black shoes were muddy and wet, and her face. Her eyes were milky white, and her mouth hung wide open like a snake, like her jaw had been grossly broken. She let out a blood-curdling and ear-piercing scream of agony, and began to shuffle up the stairs so fucking fast that I snapped out of my fear lock, and I ran the fuck back inside, slamming and locking the door behind me. There was no way she could run that fast, even if all of her bones weren't broken into wrong directions. I ran back to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and then I pulled out the walkie-talkie, screaming into it. "Is anyone there? Donnie, where the fuck are you? Someone answer me, goddamn it." Then I heard the creaking of a door. I slowly turned, and I froze when I saw what was there. The door was still there, locked and shut, and had been completely undisturbed. What scared me was the once locked giant cabinet that now stood open, with a kid dressed like a Charlie Brown ghost standing just in front of it. I stood there, unmoving, until I heard the little shit giggle. I recognized that giggle. No fucking way. I pulled off the sheet to see one of Donnie's kids, Marvin, sporting a smirk and a walkie-talkie. "Dad, Joey, I got him. Ha! Pissed his pants just like I said he would, right?" He and his other son laughed from the other end of the walkie. I was mad, but glad that I wasn't about to get murdered in a goddamn wooden tower. I grabbed his walkie and shot back. "Pissed me off is what you did, you fucking asshole. I hope you're happy. Hearing you scream like a little girl sure did make me happy, all right. Yeah, screw you too. That wasn't even me. That was your stupid zombie chick. Who was that? Your wife?" "My what? Does the ghost look like a zombie from that far away? You said yourself it looked like Charlie." "Not the ghost, dumbass. The woman on the stairs. She screamed and ran up them so that she could scare me into the tower. Hell, she must be like an Olympic runner. Did you get Usain Bolt?" "Dean, I didn't put no woman on the stairs." Upon hearing that he would have the night shift for the next couple of weeks until they found a replacement, my friend quit and vowed never to return to that park. To this day, he swears that either Donnie never told him about that park being a prank, or that he saw something entirely unrelated. I've began to question my own participation in the night shifts, and consider myself lucky that the few times I've been on it, I had been stationed at the north and eastern sectors. That's it for today.